We next move into a keynote by PK Gulati, Chairman Emeritus TiE Dubai, on the topic Tenets for World Class from India. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage PK Gulati.
Hi, good evening. How many of you have built companies or are building companies? And how many of you are building companies which they someday hope will go global? So I get asked this question all the time, why and how we should build. Some people may have got a sneak peek, we spoke earlier. It is my pet peeve when startups come and talk to me about, hey, should we go global? Or should we look at a company which will actually look at the world as its oyster? So we're going to have this session, and this session came out of a discussion. You know, some startups went to shows, trade shows, they were there, they got some kind of, their minds were expanded, and they suddenly realized the world is a bit different from what I thought when I was sitting at home. And when we were having this conversation, Atul, Ram, all these people who are a part, Mr. GTM Bandari, all these people are a part of this discussion, and we thought we'll do a session. And we called it the 10 Commandments of Building Global. So I would like all of you to be a part of this conversation. So please. So this is a pet peeve start, and what did we start with? The first thing. First thing is these should work, huh? The first commandment is, thou shalt begin global. So basically what we're trying to say is, you should start from thinking of a global company. Atul, you would remember this conversation. The bigger problem that I see is most companies do not see global as something which they actually ideate as, actually start as. It is perfectly fine to build or think of a global company and have India as the first port of call.
PK, firstly, thanks for telling us we'll be on this panel 10 minutes back.
You've been evangelizing for 10 years before that? That's fine. 20, okay.
I like to say, if you want to be world class, you have to compete with world class. So I think for that, you need to get out, right? And I think certainly there are a class of companies, products that are very suited for the domestic market. What we call, for example, Bharat, right? And if you're building something very specialized and you have a vision for that space and you want to really focus there, that's fine. But typical software, categories, so on, I think you're better off, as you start looking at mature markets, because that's where you'll sort of, build the product and shape it. And there's also, in product market fit, there's a product, but there's a market as well. So if you have PMF in India, don't assume you have automatic PMF in the US, for example, right? So I think you have to be very careful. And I think, especially in B2B, if you're building for B2B enterprise, if you start building for India and Western markets, I think you may potentially have taken too much.
So the second tenet is that you should look at a big enough problem. The problem has to be so big that it's seen by a very large portion of the world. The idea is to actually find a big problem and find an elegant solution to that big problem. And then the world would be your oyster. Ram.
Yeah, so I think my learning as a product manager over the years has been, go looking, if you believe there's a good problem worth solving. Sometimes the biggest challenge is figuring out how big the TAM is or SAM is or all the other AMs in trying to figure out, does it really make sense? And my realization over the years has been that, there are micro pockets of these problems existing in many markets. So sometimes if you aggregate that, it looks like a bigger problem than it is than you may realize. So for example, Atul talked about building for Bharat. In one of my jobs, I ran emerging markets for Yahoo many years ago. And as we looked at cohorts, and we did this study, we did a fairly deep study to understand, what was the commonalities across emerging markets. And we found that, we did a deep study across India, Brazil, Middle East, and we found a lot of commonality. So I'll give you one example. We looked at Allahabad, right? And as we looked at tier 1 and tier 2, and what we realized is children, around 18 to 25, or 18 to 24, or whatever age you want to pick in that category, their levels of interest was very common. So for example, all of them loved soccer. And that surprised us, because in India we thought we'll all be, cricket will come up. This is like, about 10 years ago. But what we realized is that all of their aspirational work was, their interests were very common. As we looked at Egypt, India, and we looked at, Indonesia, if I remember right, and a couple of other markets. So what we realized is, while we would have gone off and solved the India problem, we realized there are a lot of commonalities that if you thread similar markets, look at similar cohorts, we actually come up with a much bigger market size than we thought possible. So I think the point you're making is very valid.
Yeah. Come on. Then thou shalt build deep and unfair insight. I see a lot of startups, especially at the early stages, which come in, which are what I call trend surfing. People who find a trend and say, hey, I want to build this for India, I want to build this for this area, and all that. What I suggest to people, if you want to go there, remember there'll be far more intelligent people than you on the other side. So make sure you get deep insight, get people who can give you that insight, get mentors, domain experts, do your homework, do the trudge, do the hard work to find that. And in Atul's words, inch wide, mile deep.
Yep. And you can build 1 inch at a time, right? But I think if you pick a problem space, you pick a market, and you have an unmet problem which the customer is willing to pay for, I think you have to build something, again, world class. To do that, you have to focus. And I think we'll all agree in our ecosystem, the learning is, I think we may end up doing too much, right? So you have to pick something and then say no to 9 things, pick that one thing, and then build, let's say you're building an application, look at the science under it and see if you can evolve the science, right? Because that's where you'll have IP and patents and all, and that's long-term thinking. Long-term versus short-term thinking. And then once you conquer that inch, you go to the other inches. But as we've heard from all the speakers, I think this is the era of platforms, right? And there's massive consolidation happening. If you're building a one-off use case, especially if you're building some infrastructure, right? Not even an application, right? Your ability to scale that will be very limited, and we've seen that across domains. For example, analytics, right? Very few analytical tools that are just very horizontal will go on to become a ThoughtSpot or, Tableau, right? I mean, it requires massive R&D and engineering.
You want to add?
So the topic is GTM, right? This morning we had a short roundtable on go-to-market. One of the guys there in the room mentioned, talking about deep and unfair insight. He ran into an individual who lives in Texas, knew 20 customers in his space, right? In that particular example is automobile and insurance industry. So his insight was focused on even a state and ended up hiring one person, or at least contracting with one person, who had insights into 20 customers in that area. And that individual would have taken about a week to get meetings with at least 10 of them, right? Talk of unfair insight, right?
Correct.
While the rest of them are doing content marketing and brochures and all of that stuff, this guy had an extremely unfair insight, but then he researched, figured out an individual, went there. He said, I don't know about US. I don't even know about Southern US. I know about the 15 to 20 players in Texas. I can help you reach them.
Yeah. Then the other thing is, I cannot not tell you what is the importance of building a community around what you're doing. And this community is both inside and outside. A very good example of this Shekhar Kirani gave us was when he went to look at Freshdesk at that time. One of the biggest reasons, and it was a very big surprise. I don't know if you remember when Excel wrote a $1 million check to a company which had an ARR of something like a few $1,000s or something of that sort. It was a very big surprise. And everybody asked this question, and Shekhar's answer was, listen, there are people from 17 countries giving him his credit card and his money. What product market fit do I want more than that? That's a commitment. He'd built a community of people who are picking up his product and do that. And on the other side, the community example, which I always give, is the community which Atul has been instrumental in this is the deep tech community. If you look at that community and how vibrant that is, you actually start getting your first people who support you from this community that you build. Now, you can use product marketing to build it. You can do articles to do it. You can do thought leadership. There are many ways to do that. But thou shalt build an engaged community is a tenet.
But building community is tough, right? I mean, just to stay on that topic, one of the things with community is it is noisy, it is large, it's hard to manage. We have, all of us, how many of you here on some kind of NASSCOM WhatsApp group?
We need more people to get onto that group.
Atul, you have a whole market in front of you. But
send Ram your phone number, please.
But I think the point we're making here is, this conference was put together by a community, right? And you see the vibrancy that comes as part of it. And here's PK, he conceived this session and then he pulled 3 of us onto the stage as he's walking up to this thing. But you know what? That's fine. Because, we're part of the community. And, we are here to support each other. I think that's the biggest part here that you're talking about.
And then, since I want to go to the next one, we'll come back to the community because there's more on this.
Sure.
Thou shalt build a diverse team. The other thing which I cannot emphasize more is the fact of the need of diversity in your team. A lot of it, and especially when you're going global, you'll realize it's an essential element. We tend to live in our own echo chambers. And when we take people from around us, remember, they're closer to that echo chamber than you realize. So you think one thing, you think similarly. When diversity comes in, it brings in value which is multiplicative. So you'll realize how this works, especially when you're going abroad. Any thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah, Rajan was up on stage earlier. I heard him once say, don't hire the best people you know, hire the best people, period, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is another introspection of our ecosystem. As we've done this for 10, 15 years, I think we tend to gravitate towards our network, friends, maybe even family. I think that's good. But the other thing is horses for courses. As you grow, I think you need to bring in diverse people who may not be a mirror image of ourselves, right? So we cannot judge them basis who we are, but what they can bring to the table, and we need to help them, settle into the culture and sort of deliver.
Shekhar mentioned this morning, amongst many other things, he talked about content marketing as an area which is. Now, how many founders in the room in their early few weeks, months have gone on and hired content writers?
Not too many.
Right? That's another element of a diverse team.
Correct.
Right? Somebody who comes in and says, you've got a bunch of engineers in the team, you've got a bunch of product people on the team, you've got a bunch of sales and business people on the team. But if you're trying to grow inorganically, SaaS, reaching out to customers, building a community, your ability to communicate and reach out to people who you probably don't even know through random channels, right, is going to come from somebody who's an expert at writing content, thinking about content, not necessarily your top engineer or your top product guy, no offense to those guys, or even your CEO.
Correct.
Right? Or no offense to investors, but none of those guys. Maybe there's somebody who looks at your product and says, well, how would I communicate this in a language which is understood across 10, 15, 20 cultures, right? And one point. Second quick point is, again, from the GTM session this morning, there was a feedback that when we write thought leadership articles, can we customize it by the market, right? I'm building automobile insurance claims processing in the Australian market. This particular commission, agency, et cetera, deals with. And then in the American market, so it gets you much closer to the customer.
Correct.
It'll come from a diverse set of thinking.
Correct. Then this is something which is exceptionally important. I find, and I'm saying it from the outside because I see it from the outside of India perspective, I find our startups to be timid. They're timid. They get cowed down. They get pressurized. You have an idea, you're standing by it, and you suddenly get somebody coming after and saying, hey, it doesn't work. And you'll say, oh, okay. Why don't you stand your ground? So I think this timidness also has to disappear. You need to be confident, you need to work hard, and then stand by it. There's a lot of support. Community helps. The diaspora help is this. You have to think big. You have to stand up, and we have to take our place in the world. Correct, guys?
Absolutely. So I think courage is a key part to that.
Yes.
And I think, many of the founders here and those who have kind of grown their companies over time, I think that's probably a thread. Both courage and resilience would be a key piece to this. And the point you're making is actually pretty valid. That, I think, my experience of having worked with many of you in this, in this room or been part of, other communities, etc., where I see these founders, the knowledge is there, the confidence, it's really, even the confidence is there in certain settings. But in terms of, when you step into a new arena or into a new place, I think that confidence needs to come with you.
And then we talk about thought leadership. So leadership, you need to see and be seen as one. That's where it is. Then, this is another one. Thou shalt not celebrate raising money. I've seen press releases when people raise money. It's equivalent to actually taking a loan and celebrating that. I would celebrate the day I pay back the loan, correct? And in this case, with a few zeros, all the investors here, you want a few zeros added to the back of it, correct? So we see too many people looking at raising to be a success. It is not a success. It's a very important step in your pathway, but that's not what it is. And too many people make it central to their success and think they're inadequate or not capable or their product is not good enough because funding doesn't go the way they think. So I don't think you should do that. Credibility, transparency, truthfulness, and integrity are few things which are universal. Doesn't matter you're starting a company, closing a company, successful or unsuccessful, you will be remembered by these 4 words. As an investor, these are the things which I will remember you by. Things may not work. Believe me, all of us are adults. We know how to lose money. But you don't want to lose money because of the lack of any of these 4 things that we talked about. Ram, you had thoughts on this?
No, absolutely. I think integrity, interestingly, today I was doing a set of press interviews, and one of the journalists asked me, he said, what do you see from an integrity and trust perspective in your ecosystem? And, and I think, frankly, I have not experienced the lack of trust or integrity, at least in the companies that are part of our cohort. So I was truthful with them, but I said that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? And we have seen examples of this. We have seen, whether we believe the press articles or not, whether we have, maybe we have had personal experiences with certain kinds of individuals. But this is a very important key part, and I think, again, a staying part to the long term of organizations. I think Rajan referred to that today in terms of, hiring your CFO. What's the right time to do it? And don't hire somebody who's your friends and family circle, when you do that, because the credibility of an independent, a person who's managing the money is a very important part to the way you build your organization.
Also, remember, we only need one negative example, and it'll actually overpower 100 positive examples. That's the problem with these things. So, if you look at, for example, the few examples of whatever where you read press about, people not behaving nicely, you probably saw 1,000 other examples of people behaving nicely. But this is what gets counted. So we have to make sure this doesn't happen.
Just one more thing on this. Okay. Credible, truthful, transparent, integrity, all are critical, especially when you're selling to people you don't even know, or there's a very low chance you're going to actually physically meet them.
Correct.
Right? And that's the scaling of the SaaS, right? This manifests itself in many different ways, right? Simple things today, right? I mean, and I tell this to, in fact, we told this to panel earlier. Selling is a lot about de-risking. De-risking from the buyer's point
side,
of view,
yeah.
right? I mean, you've sold the product and everything, but the last part, the buyer is actually trying to figure out, you just have to help them de-risk, right? Are these guys going to steal my data? Are these guys going to not manage my data correctly? Not out of bad intent, but just out of, do they have the processes, right? These things are not necessarily malicious intent. These things are also about, do you have processes to protect yourself?
Also lack of awareness and foolishness many times, by the way.
Right? So you have to help de-risk the sale with the customer, bringing these elements as a culture in the organization.
And then, last but not the least, the 10th commandment is, thou shalt travel. Open your mind. Travel is when you need to understand how people deal with the problem that you're dealing with. You have to do that. Get out of your echo chamber, get out of your, your comfortable Zoom background and go to the world. That's what you should be curious. Curiosity, in my opinion, is one of the biggest skills of a product, manager. And then you need to pay it back to the community. Like the community is paying you, you need to give back. When you reach that other side, you have to pay back is a very, very important part. And all these people who are here are paying back. That's what they're doing. They don't need to be here. So to summarize, so building a viable global footprint is a mindset. It's not offices, it's not countries, it's a mindset. We have to change our mindset to go build global powerhouses. It doesn't mean we don't build for India. We built an Indian company which is global in nature. And it starts with thinking global and refusing to think small. Thank you. Thank you so much. Picture.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining PK on stage. PK.